Joining me now is former White House National Security Advisor under President Biden, Jake Sullivan. He's now the host of the Long Game podcast, where they've talked about Iran, so everybody should take a listen. I have so many things to ask you about, including negotiations and the specifics. I just want to start with, just to give people at home kind of a level set here. What we know right now is J.D. Vance was leading negotiations last weekend. Those ended. He came back. No agreement was reached. Today, a Pakistani delegation reportedly traveled to Tehran to ease tensions and schedule another round of talks. Meanwhile, Trump is still implementing a naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran is now threatening to close the Red Sea. Those are all of the different variables. Tell me what I missed, and just give us an assessment of kind of where things stand right now.
Well, what's really interesting is now it looks like the Trump team is finally starting to negotiate the kind of deal that I do believe was on offer to them before this whole thing kicked off, before Americans died, before the Strait of Hormuz was closed, before the global economy was sent into a tailspin, because they're recognizing that to do diplomacy requires a simple thing, which is compromise, that they're going to have to give a little to get a little from the Iranians. And so it seems like they're trying to narrow the differences, especially on the enrichment question. And there's reporting that the U.S. has put on the table a deal that isn't zero enrichment forever, but is trying to limit their enrichment for a certain period of time, something we did in the Obama administration as well. And so now they'll go back and forth, and I think they'll end up in a place that's going to feel to a lot of us quite a bit like the Iran nuclear deal that Barack Obama and John Kerry and Bill Burns and Wendy Sherman and me and so many others negotiated. And they're going to end up there having pulled out of the deal in the first place and gotten us into this awful mess. That would be my prediction of where this all seems to
Okay,
be.
so I want to come back there, because that feels like it would be a win, even though Trump, a win for the country, I should say, even though Trump ripped that deal up several years ago. When you were doing the interview with Jon Stewart, I'm not as funny as him. I'll try, but I'll ask you lots of questions. Remind us, because there's a lot of different plans that have been floating out there and people are referencing. So what was on the table then that they didn't seem to understand?
Well, there are two aspects to it that I think the Iranians were putting forward at that time, which are back in play now. One of them has to do with the disposition of the highly enriched uranium, basically rendering it not useful, making it so that it's not inches away from them being able to produce a weapons-grade uranium. And the second is willingly entertaining the idea of a moratorium on enrichment for a certain period of time. And those two things, which are now in discussions today, I believe could just as easily have been negotiated in the days leading up to the bombing campaign as now, and we could have skipped over this period where all of the costs are now being borne and where the United States' credibility on the global stage has been completely shredded. So essentially, we have come all the way back around to where we were before all of this started.
Right now, it's the same negotiators, plus J.D. Vance, who didn't seem to have an understanding of all of the details of things. Have things changed? And when you think about how the Iranians look at this, I mean, anytime anyone is starting a set of negotiations, you have actually led negotiations, I have not, they always look at sort of a summary or brief of the people they're negotiating with. Do they look at their lack of knowledge of things before? Do they look at their business interests? What are the factors that the Iranians are looking at as they look ahead here?
Well, the first and most important things the Iranians are looking at is basically their sense of what their own negotiating room, what they can go to the table and give and what they can't give. And one thing the Iranians have been clear on for years is that they're not prepared to just declare complete surrender, unconditional surrender, as President Trump keeps saying. They're going to demand that they retain certain rights under what they view to be their rights. And then when they look across the table, they're going to say, are there people on the other side who we can actually do a deal with, we can work through the details of to come up with something that will then actually be enforceable? And here, I think their experience over the last year has been really problematic, because multiple times they've gone into the middle of negotiations with this administration only for this administration to turn around and start bombing. And multiple times they have put proposals on the table only for the administration to just up the ante and essentially say, we're going to demand no quarter, no compromise, complete surrender, the opposite of diplomacy. And so now I think they've got to be a little confused, because now they're in a situation where they're going back and forth with these same negotiators on very similar terms to what they put forward before. And now there's an actual negotiation taking place over them. I think they're probably saying, what is happening here? What is going on here? But what is certainly the case is the Iranians don't believe that they're in a weak position right now. They believe they have leverage, they believe they have staying power, and they believe that they can grind this out if need be. And so they're not just going to fold in the face of bluster and threats. And I think the intelligence community is telling that to President Trump and his negotiators. And the question is, are they listening now when they clearly were not listening to the intelligence community before?
Let me ask you about the factor of some other players here. I mean, we don't know all the reasons why the ceasefire got very squishy. There were a number of reasons, but including the Lebanon piece.
Yeah.
Prime Minister Netanyahu, obviously there's quite a history with the United States, and Prime Minister Netanyahu pushing the United States and past presidents. I mean, Tony Blinken said he pushed President Biden. John Kerry told me last week he pushed President Obama to do exactly what Donald Trump is doing. He kind of can be the skunk at the garden party here sometimes. Is there a concern, or do you have a concern that he could jump in here and decide, no, we're not going to be a part of this
Well, I think
deal,
what we saw with respect to Lebanon just over the course of the immediate hours following the ceasefire, with Israel not just continuing, but radically escalating the bombing in Lebanon, killing a significant number, not just of Hezbollah militants, but of civilians as well, going the extra mile to try and drive home the point. No, we're continuing our campaign in Lebanon. This was, I believe, disruptive to the effort here. And frankly, it seems to me President Trump, even though he's not saying so out loud, kind of seems to feel that way, because the signals that are now coming out over the last 24 hours is there's some pressure on the Israelis actually to accept a ceasefire in Lebanon. Now, it is true that Prime Minister Netanyahu has had a decades-long desire to get the United States to bomb Iran. And he's gone to multiple presidents to do it, including Presidents Obama and President Biden, and neither of them would do it. And now he's found in President Trump a willing person to do it. And the reason that President Obama and President Biden wouldn't do it is because they knew exactly what would happen and what has happened. And President Trump, frankly, just threw caution to the wind and went for it. And I think that that is deeply unfortunate. But at the end of the day, that's on President Trump himself. Prime Minister Netanyahu pressed him, but it was the American commander-in-chief who said, we're going to do this, and he should have to own every consequence of that decision.